All right. Good morning. Says we're live. So Heather might send me a text and confirm that we are live and she can hear me. She is not in studio this morning with me, so just me here in the Ask the Agronomist studios. She has confirmed that she can hear me. So thank you, Heather. She had other pressing matters this morning, so she was not able to join us, but she is kind of keeping an eye here from afar, and always makes me feel better when she's watching and verifying that we are connected and good. So we're here at the Monmouth Studios and kind of kicking it old school here, back with our old format. We continue to experiment and learn with the new format, and when Heather is able to join me, we are continuing to pursue making the hopefully making the content better with the new format. She also tells me she has figured out a way that I could have a guest who is at a other location, and the guest and I do not have to be in the same place at the same time, and you can like split screen see both of us. So we're going to experiment with that here one of these days. I'm afraid to do new stuff because every time I do something new, it seems like it turns into a bit of a disaster. But Heather is brave and she's confident, and we're going to figure out how to do that with her help. So I always get very dependent on my producer help. Jennifer used to help a lot, and then Adam used to help a lot. Now Heather helps a lot. So I seems like I'm always dependent on someone to help me pull this off. So thanks to all of you who have helped over the years. Season 6 already of Ask the Agronomist. That's crazy. Not sure where the last 6 years have gone, but it's been fun, and we will continue to do this as long as you're interested in watching, and I can think of something to talk about. So I do not have a lot of topics for today, so I encourage people to ask questions, unless you want the episode to end early, and then if you stay quiet, we'll probably be done in less than an hour. But I do have some fungicide trials from last year that I did that I have referenced before, but I've never actually shown you the results of. And so today we're going to kind of dive into that a little bit. So I'm probably going to be trying to hold my iPad up and show you yield maps and pictures and such. So hopefully that will translate well. And I did have a question come in before the episode. I occasionally get viewers that text me, which is cool, and give me some ideas for the program. And one of my faithful listeners, apologize for the cough, by the way. I had a nasty cold flu bug a couple weeks ago, and seems like the cough is sticking around. But anyway, this was this particular viewer. You know who you are. I'm not going to call him out live here on the air, even though I don't have anything bad to say about him. But but he does tend to ask the questions that you kind of can't answer. He asked a question about glyphosate lawsuits one time, and that's an area that I don't think the lawyers want me talking about that a lot on air. And this time he asked me about someone else's product. That's another sticky wicket there. The lawyers don't really like it when Lance starts giving his opinions on someone else's product. But it is an interesting product. And without really giving my opinion on it, I am going to talk about it a little bit. So if you went to Precision Planting's winter conference, I think that was last week or maybe the week before, not too long ago, been a lot of buzz about their new seed delivery system, the one that can orient the seed and put every seed, in theory, tip down in the bottom of in the seed trench. And that will, in theory, improve the uniformity of emergence, because when seeds are lying in the trench, whatever way they happen to tumble into the trench, Sometimes the coleoptile spike is going to come out going up. Sometimes it's going to come out going sideways. If you're really unlucky, it comes out going down. And then through a mechanism called geotropism, where plants can actually sense which way is up because of the gravitational forces, that coleoptile spike will eventually, get grow in the right direction. But if it grows the wrong way for 24 hours, it's probably going to come up 24 hours later, and that sometimes happens. So some of the ununiformity that we see from plant to plant to plant is actually related to, well, how was the seed laying in the trench? You've also got factors like soil moisture, seed to soil contact, residue, diseases, insects. I mean, there's a lot of things other than how the seed was laying in the trench that can influence emergence. But theoretically, in a perfect world, if you could put every seed the same way, they will come up more uniformly. And there could be some potential yield increase to that. Now, I don't know what the technology costs, and it always comes down to ROI for you as a grower. And I'm sure it's not cheap, but if you're covering enough acres with it, I haven't seen the data on what the yield increase is. And I would also say this: the yield benefit of technology like that is I think going to be the best in some very high management situations. If you don't have any other things holding your yield back, and that's a yield limiting factor, then it should increase yield. If you've got 6 other things that are greater yield limiting factors than that, fixing that may not increase your yield. So it's going to kind of depend on the situation. But, in theory, there should be a benefit to that. And I think the higher yield levels you are at and the higher management practices you have, the more likely you are to see a benefit from fixing that. The other aspect of this that is even a little wilder, I think, is the idea that it could influence how the plant orients its leaves. And there has been some research that was done that shows that, if you could get the plants to grow their leaves towards the middle of the row rather than towards each other in the row, and you've got less overlapping leaves, you are going to maximize sunlight capture. Now, I think that's more of an issue early in the growing season than it is later in the growing season, because once you've got a fully developed canopy, I don't know how much of a difference that's going to make. But, when those plants are smaller, and we're not capturing all the sunlight anyway, if you could orient the leaves on the plant so that no two plants' leaves are ever overlapping. Now, each individual plant's leaves overlap themselves too, because the leaf that's up above is getting more sunlight than the one that is down below. And that sunlight filters down through there, and it generally works itself out. But that's another aspect of the potential value of this technology, is if it does help the plants orient the leaves in a way that there's less competition for sunlight and we're capturing a higher percentage of sunlight. Yield is all about turning sunlight and energy into carbohydrates or grain. And so, if we can capture more sunlight, if we can make plants more uniform, and if we can make plants compete with each other less, all 3 of those things are, in theory, yield positive. So I'm not going to discredit the idea at all. I think it has merit. I have no idea what it costs, and all of these. You can build a $500,000 planter and then add another $250,000 to it if you want to, and if that thing's going across enough acres, all that works. So it just depends on the cost and the acres that you've got to spread that cost across. The guys at Precision Planting do a lot of good research. They've always got a lot of good data supporting the products that they sell, and I'm sure this one is no different. But it is kind of a radical departure from where we've been, because we've been with seed tubes that are actually carrying the seed clear down to the bottom of the trench, which is how we thought we were going to get perfect spacing. This one is kind of a radical departure from that. It's kind of neat. I mean, it's literally throwing the seed down a spiraling chamber, and that spiral and the velocity of the seed keeps it from tumbling. Now, one question I would have for the manufacturer is, the pictures that are shown on the video kind of make it look like it's a flat seed. Does it work as well on rounds? Does it work as well on all shapes and sizes of seed? Because the last thing I want as a seed guy is any technology in the marketplace that puts even more pressure on people who want a very specific size and shape of seed. And those of you who who you are, you create lots of problems. We cannot control the size and shape of the seed. We can control size a little bit with defoliation and killing the plant prematurely. We can't control shape. You're always going to have rounds. You're always going to have flats. You're always going to have big ones. You're always going to have little ones. And growers tell me, you can tell me if you agree or disagree with this. Growers tell me seed is expensive. And if we ever get to the point where we can only sell half of what we grow because the other half is not the right size or not the right shape for you, you can double the price of seed. So be careful what you wish for, and give the seed industry a little bit of grace on bag weight and seed shape and size. Because if you think seed's expensive now, imagine how expensive it will be if we can only sell 30% of our production, because the other 70% doesn't suit you when it comes to weight or size. So that's a real challenge with a lot of this stuff, that everybody's got their preference. And, if everybody has if 25% of the world like large rounds, and 25% of the world like large flats, and 25% of the world like small flats, and 25% of the world liked small rounds, life would be relatively good. Even that wouldn't be perfect, because it doesn't come out that way. Sometimes you got 50% small flats and you've got no large rounds. So we can't control the distribution of how those grades come out. Some companies they've tried to solve this problem by not even grading seed. They just blend it all together, divide it out by weight. You can get small, you can get medium, you can get large. It's all non-graded plateless. That drives some growers crazy. Some growers think that's brilliant. It just depends on your perspective. But we continue to grade, and we grade very tightly. So the uniformity of the seed in a bag of DeKalb corn is extremely uniform. That means we get a lot of bag weights. That's the limitation of, if you go for uniformity, you got a wide range in bag weights. If you start combining things together so that you don't have a wide range in bag weights, you're going to lose uniformity in the bag. So it kind of depends on, what you think the lesser of evils is. Some guys, all they care about is the weight of the bag. Some guys, all they care about is the shape of the seed. Some of you, and you know who you are, get pretty damn picky on both. You got your favorite shape. You've also got your favorite size and weight. And that's a real challenge for whoever's you're buying your seed from, to make sure. And I know some guys that if it ain't what they want, they'll buy something else that is what they want. I've actually seen guys take it so far as they plant an inferior hybrid because it had the size and shape that they were looking for. That's going too far. Somebody needs to do an intervention if that is you. But anyway, so Merle, I did my best to answer your question without Bear getting in trouble. I do think it is pretty cool, pretty interesting technology, and that's what the boys at Tremont are known for. And so if you were at the meeting last week, and you probably know more about me, more than I do about that technology, because I was not able to go to that meeting last week. So I'm several generations behind on getting my planter updated to all the state of the art technology. I see a text from my friend Adam Hanger here. Okay. No, he's just telling me he can't be on live. So anyway, hi Adam. When you're recording this, when you're watching the recorded version of this. So anyway, let's move on to fungicide. So we talk a lot about fungicide here. We've maybe some of you think we talk too much about fungicides. Those of you that sell a fungicide other than ours probably really think we talk too much about our Delaro Complete products, but we are very proud of the performance of, in particular, Delaro Complete last year. Had a great year controlling both tar spot and Southern rust, and was a very strong performing product in the marketplace, as it is every year. 25 was one of those years where you could really see if your fungicide worked or not. 21 was one of those years, and then in between we had 3 years, 22, 23, and 24, where we didn't have the disease pressure that really exposed, how well did your fungicide work, or how not well did it work. But a lot of people experimented with multiple applications last year, and I've seen lots of videos online, people talking about their experience with multiple applications, and it's all over the board. And there are lots of factors that determine what you saw from a multiple application. So, the product you used made a difference. The timing you applied it made a difference. The hybrid made a difference. The level of disease pressure made a difference. The growing environment made a difference. And in the case of multiple applications post-tassel, how good your first application worked made a difference. The amount of time in between the two applications made a difference. When you sprayed the first application made a difference. So tremendous amount of variables. And because of those variables, the yield response that I have seen, just looking at what other people have done and what I have done, and just kind of looking broadly out there, the range in yield responses I saw to a second application after tassel. So that would mean you sprayed something near tassel. Sometimes guys get too late with that, and maybe that, what I want on at tassel for some people doesn't go on until brown silk. But when I say 2 applications post tassel, that means you sprayed something at tassel or shortly after, and then 2, 3, 4 weeks after your first application at tassel or near tassel, you spray it again. And the range and yield benefit that I have seen from those second applications after tassel in 2025 ranged from 0 to 40 bushel. And those are the extremes. I would say normally it was somewhere around 5 to, I'm going to say normal would be high single digits, low double digits. So maybe 8 to 12 bushel was maybe the average, which is about a break-even proposition at, when you consider the cost of application and current price of corn. But we did see tremendous plant health benefits from those second applications. And I would also say that the later harvest got delayed, the bigger the advantage was for those sequential applications, because the plant was in way better shape and it did not lodge as bad. It did not fall apart as bad. It did not disintegrate in the field as bad. And it maintained a little extra moisture, which some of you pick on fungicides. I don't like fungicide because it adds harvest moisture. Well, the harvest we've been having the last 2 or 3 years, adding harvest moisture was a big win for you and your yield. But I think the biggest benefit of those later applications was it enabled you to delay your harvest if you had to. We can't get it all out in 10 days, as you know. Last year would have been nice if we could, because bad stuff started happening. We had corn that dried in the field down to 10, 11%. That's crazy. We had beans that were 8%. So you're losing a lot of yield just from weight loss at that point. Not to mention the condition the plant was in continued to deteriorate as well. So I did I did several trials last year where I looked at multiple applications. So some of them I did I'll back up briefly on my own farm last year because I didn't start planting corn until May 5th. I didn't do much V5 last year, and that was a mistake. I should have left my V5 in, but I got chintzy, and I thought, I'm going to spend a lot of money at VT, so because I'm not planting corn early, there's less of a need for the V5. So I took my V5 out, and I basically reinvested those dollars into later applications. As it turned out, I probably would have made money had I just left the V5 in and still did what I did later. But I didn't do much V5. So because I didn't put a V5 out broadly, that gave me the opportunity to do some trials where we went out and sprayed some strips of some early foliar applications. Now, I did this with a drone and just working with the logistics of getting this done and getting people out to make those applications for me. This was not a V5. This corn was a strong V7 when we made these applications. So this corn would have been too big to be putting on a tank mix of fungicide and herbicide. So if the only way you're ever going to make that early season application is as a tank mix partner with your herbicide, you can call BS on my data because this corn was too big. You would have had to have made a special extra pass the size this corn was when I got it sprayed. So that's a little bit of a disclaimer on these results. And that might have had an impact on what I saw, or it might not. It's hard to say. We did see, particularly in Northern Illinois, I've talked to Jim Donnelly about this a lot. We never claim you're going to get any tar spot protection from a V5 application. But in Northern Illinois in 2025, they did. Tar spot came in so early that some products had enough residual, that you actually saw a delay in the onset of tar spot in those fields that had a V5 compared to those that did not. And when I say V5, it could have been V4, it could have been V6. It's somewhere in that V5 window. The later you delay that application, the more likely you are to have true disease control from it. We do a lot of V5s, going after crown rot. And I've talked about this before. There is a benefit to overall plant health from a V5 application, even a V4 application. But that fungicide is not going to translocate down to the roots. So when you see less crown rot, when you see better late season plant health, when you see plant health benefits, and you see what looks like crown rot control to you, it's not because the fungicide translocated down into the root system where those fungal pathogens are actually working. It's because it alleviated stress on the plant, made the plant feel better, made it more naturally tolerant to infections, or perhaps it controlled anthracnose leaf blight or helped with some other disease like tar spot that lessened the foliar disease load that plant was dealing with, and that lowered the stress on the plant. And so it's more of an indirect benefit on crown rot protection than a direct one. But I do feel there is a benefit. I'm not sure everybody's always going to agree with me on that. And even if there is a benefit, is it always profitable? No. I think if you just close your eyes and do it every acre every year, I think it will make you money doing it. But the ROI on that may not be as good as the ROI on your tassel time application. And the yield benefit is certainly not as good as it is on your tassel time application of fungicide. So the most important time to spray corn with fungicide is at VT, not R3 or V6. You can see benefits to putting fungicide on corn, early. You can see benefits at tassel. You can see benefits to making a later application. But the biggest bang for your buck benefit, biggest yield benefit, most agronomic benefit, even the most crown rot suppression comes from that VT application. So that's the important one. Sorry, I'm checking text here. So I'm getting normal text, not getting any Ask the Agronomist related text yet. So I am able to watch the chat here. So if you've got a question, please type it in. But let's get into let's get into some plots here. So I'm gonna try to show some pictures. So the first one I'm going to show you is one of my early season trials, and I'm trying to get to the text that has the map. There we go. Okay, so this is not actually what we ended up doing, but it's close. So you can see those 4 blocks we've got laid out in the corner of that field. Those blocks that's a pretty big field. So those blocks are about 10 acres in size, and 10 acres is a load on a drone they're 5 acres in size. 10 gallon tank, 2 gallon of the acre. So those blocks are 5 acres in size. And each of those blocks is going to get a different treatment. And then I left about 100 feet in between the blocks. And that's sprayed perpendicular to the way the rows are planted. So I'm going to cross those blocks with my yield monitor at harvest time. Now, if you can see that waterway down there, that dark Y-shaped thing, and that would be what the lower left as you're looking at that. So I didn't like how close the blocks were to each other when they laid it out that way. So what I did was I moved that 4th block to the other side of the waterway and spread out the other 3. And somewhere in my phone, I've got a picture of what that looks like. But in 5 minutes before we went live here this morning, I couldn't find that one. So I'm showing you this one, which is actually not what we did, but pay special attention in relation to that waterway with where those blocks end. So the north is at the top of the screen, south is at the bottom. So the south end of those blocks stop about halfway down that north-south waterway, if you can see that. So this is the yield map of that field. Now remember, that was a V5, or well, actually a V7 application. And this whole field got a VT application at 12 ounces of Delaro Complete. So it got a really, really good VT. Oops. I didn't want that there. It got a really, really good VT application on top of the V5. And there's also a hybrid change there. So you can see the north 40 or so acres of that field. You can see the hybrid change is basically right there. And the hybrid on the north end wasn't quite as good as the hybrid, the next hybrid to the south. They were both very good. But if you're looking at that, I think I can kind of see, not so much on the first block, but I can kind of make out where the second block is and where the third block is. And then you can see right in line with the waterway where we skipped over the waterway. I think that stands out as not as good. And then where the 4th block is, which is on the other side of the waterway up here. Whoops, up here. Man, that's hard. It's also a little stronger. Now, it's not dramatically different. I didn't try to go into field region report and tease that out. It would be a little bit hard to do that. But I also find it interesting if I pull up the imagery, the in-season imagery, the field health reports. So that's not the yield map. That's the field health map. Now that does generally correlate fairly well. to the yield map, but in this field, it doesn't correlate particularly well. This end of the field up here is a lot lighter soil type than down here. This corn up here was a little bit behind on the lighter soil. This down here, you can now see that the hybrid change line is showing up even more dramatically. And the hybrid on the north end of the field, although it yielded slightly less, was healthier. But you do see, particularly on the last two blocks. So here would be block 4 over here. Man, I know you're all laughing at me. My brain just doesn't work good enough to do that. So here would be block 3. Yeah, and you touch screen, it slides. And then over here on the other side of the waterway, this is some really poor quality TV here. There we go. So where block 3 and block 4 end lines up perfectly with the other map that we looked at that showed where we sprayed those trials. Now, the imagery is not really picking up a big difference in block 1 and 2. So block 1 would have been the weakest treatment we made. It was just a half rate of a generic Strobe. Very, very cheap application. Block 2 was a half rate of Delaro Complete, which is kind of our standard application. Block 3 was a half rate of Delaro Complete with some foliar. And block 4, actually, as I found out later, was a bit of an off-label application because we actually don't have a label that allows you to do 8 ounces of Delaro Complete at V5, but that's what that block is. So there's definitely something showing up in the field health imagery. This image was taken 21st of September. So even late in the season, there was something that we did with that early V7 application that influenced plant health in this particular field. I'm going to go to another part of this field and show you a map that looks even a little more dramatic. So that diagonal green block there lines up exactly with where we did the sequential post tassel application. So on a 45-degree angle, we sprayed a 25-acre block crossways across a couple different hybrids here, and that's why I've got 4 yield region reports pulled up. There's 2 different hybrids there, and then I'm comparing with and without that sequential application. So again, this part of this whole farm got 12 ounces of Delaro Complete at tassel or slightly after tassel. And then on this 25-acre block on a diagonal, we sprayed 8 ounces of, again, we used Delaro Complete. I probably would have used straight Delaro typically on that second application, but what I had available to me was Delaro Complete. So we did 8 ounces sequentially. So you're looking at that and you're thinking, man, that must be 50 bushel and about 10 points wetter. So it's not that dramatic. But I did go in and pull field region reports. So on that hybrid, that corn was making 253 there, 16.9% moisture. And then if you compare that to the unsprayed, well, it's not unsprayed. It had 12 ounces on it. It was 244. So I had a 9 bushel bump there. Now, if you look at that imagery, it looks like more than 9 bushel. And I would say that was pretty typical. The improvement in plant health was dramatically more than the improvement in yield on some of these sequential applications. And I think part of that was the dryness we were experiencing by that time. Those plants, even if they were healthier, they were still short on water, still short on nutrients. They still had limited resources. And it's interesting. There's only about 0.2 of a point difference in moisture. I could see that strip harvesting. I actually was in the combine when I went through these trials, and when you came to it, you could tell you were driving into greener corn. You could look over at the monitor and you could tell you were in better corn. And when you came out the other side of it, you could tell it went the other way. I think if I remember right, the other hybrid was a little more dramatic difference. The other hybrid was not as good, but it was 246 in the double treated area. And if I look at the field region report in the area next to it, it'll pull up there in a second, 229. So I was pushing like, what was that, about 17 bushel difference there, a little more difference in moisture between those two. But there was absolutely a nice benefit to that sequential application. I did the same thing. Let's see, did we get, there we go. There we go. So had a viewer that commented that 10 ounce rate at VT made a huge difference over 8 ounces, and we see that pretty consistently. And 12 typically beats 10. I get it. The higher you go, the more money it costs. We're pretty proud of that product. It's not cheap, but in fungicide, I do think kind of like seed, you get what you pay for, and the more expensive products typically are better, and particularly in a year like last year, the better products were just better, and I'm not going to say it's going to be that way this dramatically every year, but last year was a very exciting year for Delaro Complete, because if you were honest and you were objective and you were looking at, if you were making apples to apples comparisons, same hybrid, same application timing, same field, same, when you go from field to field to field and different application timings and different hybrids and, all the different variables that are out there. I mean, anything can look good here and anything can look bad over there. But if it was a true fair comparison, Delaro Complete was a phenomenal performing product last year. So we're really excited about more people using Delaro Complete, and the rate enhancement's very important. So I appreciate Lance for calling that out, that he saw a benefit to 10 ounces over 8 ounces, and I think 12 ounces would have looked better than 10. And I say that for all fungicides. So I'm not just making this a Bayer commercial here. I think we've got some really good fungicide products that I think are superior to a lot of things that are on the market. But I don't care what fungicide you're using, use a full rate of whatever you do, especially at that tassel time application. If you want to cut back to the standard rate or use something a little less expensive on your sequential, application or on your V5, I don't think that's a huge sin. But on that VT application, and I say VT because it should be made between VT and R1. R1 is pollination, so that's green silks with pollen flying. I don't want to see any brown silks when we're making our first fungicide application after tassel. You're going to have brown silks when you make your sequential application later, but you shouldn't have any brown silks when you're spraying your first one. Let's see, my iPad's wanting to update. Don't want to do that now. So I'm going to switch to another farm, another hybrid, another county. Did something similar here. I'm going to pull up a split screen on this one. In one split screen, I'm going to have the field health image, and on the other one, I'll have the yield map. And this is I looked this up last night. I think it's by October 4th. Yeah. Okay. So this is one of those where it looked like it was going to be huge, and it wasn't as huge as it looked like. So on the field health imagery side, you can see that diagonal green block there. That was a 19-acre check strip that I couldn't get it on as much of an angle as I wanted. and keep it out of the end rows and keep it out of the trees and keep it in a spot that was fair to have it. So it's on a slight angle. It's almost running with the corn rows because that field's planted straight north and south, but it's dramatically, apparent in the field health imagery that, we definitely improved late season health, and I could see it. I mean, there was some down corn in this field everywhere except where that green block is. There wasn't any down corn there. This corn actually stood through. This didn't get harvested until about the 1st of November. This field stood through every October windstorm we had, and it was in pretty good shape across the whole field, but it was a lot better, where that sequential application had been made. So I'm going to close the imagery here and just look at the yield map. So looking at the yield map of that field, you can kind of see the, where that area is. It's not, it's not super dramatic in the yield data. The field region reports, I'll pull them up here. So in the overtreated area, that block was 253. And right next to it, where we didn't put on the sequential, it was, wake up there, 240. So I had a 13 bushel response in this field on this particular hybrid. This happened to be 114.42. And the other two hybrids in the other field, one of them was 108.17, which is a 108-day that almost nobody plants. And the other one was our old 65.95. And I had a bigger response in the 108.17 and in the 114.42 than I did 65.95, which is not surprising to me based on what I know about those hybrids. But, those are some, I would say those are typical-ish responses to sequential applications last year. I did the same thing the year before in 2024. Didn't see a thing. We didn't have the disease pressure in 2024 that we did in 2025. Nobody was doing that kind of stuff back in 2021, which is the last year that you really needed to do it prior to 2025. A bunch of us ran out and did them in 2022 in response to what we saw in 21. Didn't see a benefit in 22. You got to have some bad, what going on to, justify another application after you've made a good tassel time application. And I will say that a lot of people have kind of warmed up to the idea of using a higher rate at tassel and hoping that means they never have to spray again. Now, I used the highest label rate possible at tassel, and I still got a benefit from another application last year. Now, the environment I was in, I had quite a bit of tar spot. I had a lot of southern rust. As you slide north of me, it was more tar spot, less southern rust. As you go south of me, it was less tar spot, more rust. The area that some of the toughest corn yields in the state of Illinois were right here in the Monmouth area and north and west of here, where we had a lot of tar spot and a lot of rust. As you go south, corn yields got better because there was less tar spot, just as much rust. And as you went north, the tar spot just kept getting worse and worse. Another question coming in. Do you see any difference between standard rate premium product at VT followed by standard rate generic Strobe or a premium product full rate single pass VT? Okay. So that question would be basically, and there's a lot of questions you can ask that nobody honest is going to have data on that, because we haven't really tested every different thing you can do. You could spray, full rates versus standard rates. You could use generics versus premium. You could look at, I get this question a lot. Well, how's a full rate of generic compared to a standard rate of premium? So there, and that doesn't even get you into the differences between products. So a little bit of coaching here. I'm going to ask people to, let's up our game a little bit. And I've been critical of my sellers and my dealers, when they're asking about, a performance issue, and they ask somebody, did you use fungicide? And they say yes. That tells you nothing. I don't know when it was applied. I don't know what the product was. I don't know what the rate was. I mean, there were some crappy fungicide programs sprayed last year, and they looked like it, and there were some really good fungicide programs sprayed last year. So you can't just say, yeah, I used fungicide and answer that question. You needed to get into the weeds, like this question here is kind of getting into the weeds a little bit. So I would say we saw benefits to premium products last year. You can find trials to dispute that. You can get, most of the university data that's out there is comparing all of the good products against each other. Some of them look at rates, but a lot of times you don't have different rates of, generics versus premiums in the same trial. And if you do, it's one trial here or one trial there, and they're using this generic here and that generic there. There were benefits to all fungicides last year, but not all fungicides are created equal. And if you can find a source of data on that you trust, always keep in mind it's one location. It's, it depends on what the hybrid was. It depends on planting date. It depends on what kind of disease pressure we had. So it's really, really, really hard to make those comparisons. And I know you can save a lot of money using the generic products, but if you're going to use generics, you need to have multiple modes of action, and you definitely need to be at full rates. If all you're using is a standard rate of a generic strobe because you can do that for $4, there's not a lot of value in that $4 application when it comes to, season long, disease protection. Now, the other thing that we need to be honest about is there, for disease resistance management practices, our labels, prevent more than 2 applications of strobe per year. So that's a aspect of fungicides that doesn't get talked about enough, probably. But just be aware, you are not supposed to do a V5, a VT, and an R3 on the same acre, because if there's a strobe, and it doesn't matter if it's a different strobe every time, if there's a strobilurine in each of those applications, that's 3 applications of strobilurine per year. And if you read the labels closely, and all the labels have a statement in there that you are not to apply strobies more than twice in a single growing season. So there are some guys out there that are really in love with spraying fungicide that are probably not heeding that little clause in the label. They may not be going over the maximum amount allowed, but you like, for example, Delaro Complete, you can spray 24 ounces of Delaro Complete in a growing season, and you could do that 6 followed by 12, would be 18. You could do 4 followed by 12 would be 16. You're not getting anywhere near the 24 max. You could do 12 followed by 12 would put you at the max. And I know people that are doing that. But if you're doing 12 followed by 12 plus, 4 ounces or 6 ounces at V5, that's what we're not supposed to be doing. Not to say that the plant doesn't appreciate it, but those applications would be off label because of that disease management stipulation. We're just trying to, not destroy this chemistry by exposing the disease to it more than 2 times in a growing season. So, you could mix that up and use a product at your V5 that doesn't have a strobe. There's ways you could, because the triazoles and the other classes of chemistry do not have that restriction. But a lot of times those products are not not what tend to get used. So I can't. I've talked a lot here, and I did not answer the question that came in directly because I don't have data to back up my answer to that question. My personal belief is, and I do think there is data out there to support this, if you're going to use a mixture of generics and premiums to try to save money, use your generics or your lesser products on the early foliar applications and the sequential applications. And if you're willing to use a good premium product at a full rate, do that at VT. And if you're going to skimp on the early stuff, skimp on the late stuff, I think we could probably generate data to demonstrate, and we have on our research farms. I don't have that data here in front of me today. Heather's probably wishing I did, because we do have some trials that we have done internally, demonstrating the benefits of premium products over generics. But it varies, and you could pick up somebody else's trial would say something completely different. There is a lot of variability in the performance of fungicides. There's variability in the benefit of fungicide, period, from one trial to the next. I mean, sometimes there's a 5 bushel yield increase, sometimes it's 50. And in the environments where the yield benefit to fungicide was only 5 bushel, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between a premium product and a generic product. Where the the difference was 50 bushel, you can probably get some separation between, even between the premium products sometimes in those environments. So it kind of depends on the magnitude of the response that you're seeing. But I think to kind of wrap things up here as we're looking ahead to 2026, I hope 2026 is not the kind of growing season that makes anybody want to spray fungicide 3 times. Because no matter how often you spray fungicide, your corn would probably be better if it didn't have the disease. And we can do a good job protecting a large amount of our yield and even increasing yield, from alleviating stress. But, I hope 26 is a different kind of growing season where we don't have the foliar disease pressure that we had in 25. And I think we know how to, looking at June weather, looking at, how bad is tar spot in the north, how bad is southern rust in the south. Is there even potential for southern rust to move into the Corn Belt in 26? The potential doesn't always exist. If there's no bad rust in the southern U.S., the likelihood of us having bad southern rust in the Midwest is pretty low. Can't say it's zero. You get a bad enough storm, you could blow it in from Mexico, or you could bring it in from somewhere afar. But generally speaking, when we have bad southern rust years, southern rust is bad in the southern, corn states, and we get storm fronts moving up from the south. And like last year, when that happens and those rust spores, arrive here, and we've got our own subtropical environment going on where it's really moist and really humid and really warm, which is exactly what it was last year, it takes off and flourishes because, it feels like it's in Florida when it's in central Illinois last summer. So I think we can, we can't always predict disease outbreaks, but we can recognize, okay, are we in the right kind of weather pattern for diseases to be an issue? Do we have the presence of the disease? If you've got the presence of the disease and you're having growing environment like we had last year, well, then you need to be prepared to do more than you normally do. If we go through, so the 2 years prior to last year, 23 and 24, we had pretty severe May and June droughts. We were worried about the crop burning up before pollination there a couple years. That is not a conducive environment to get tar spot going. You got to have lush growing conditions. You got to have a wet May, June. You need a dense, lush, fully developed canopy early in the growing season. So when you plant early, get off to a great start, have ideal growing conditions, have high moisture conditions in June, that's perfect for tar spot. That's exactly what we had last year. The only way you could have made it better for tar spot last year was if it would have been cooler. It was a little warm for tar spot last year, and I think that's partly why it took a little bit longer for it to get revved up than some of us expected. In the end, it ended up getting just as bad as we thought, but I actually thought it would be bad about a month earlier than it was. We were very fortunate that it didn't look bad until August. When it looks bad in July, whew, that's awful. And that's what Northern Illinois sees sometimes. We generally don't see it getting started that early this far south, but when when it looks bad at tassel time, that's going to be bad. And so some people have seen that. Most of you have not, and I hope that's something you never see, because that's never going to end well when you see bad tar spot at tassel time. So I don't see any more questions. I think this is kind of a good stopping point here. So we'll be back in 2 weeks, which I didn't look that up, but whatever 2 weeks from today is, we'll be back with our next episode. Appreciate the questions today, and look forward to talking to you again in 2 weeks. And if you have ideas for things you'd like to see us discuss on here, as long as it's not things that are going to get me fired or sued, we'll try to work them into the program. And I really appreciate those of you who watch live and put questions in the chat, because just makes the content better when we get input from you guys. So everybody keep warm. Got a little warm up here on the way, which will not bother me at all. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Take care.